part 2 of the Revelation.
Oh, yes.
Alright, so recapping here just a little bit. We have finished up the intertestamental period and the life of Jesus, the Acts of the Apostles. We are now 30 years after the Acts of the Apostles is wrapped up. All the other apostles are dead. Paul has been martyred, and John is in exile on the island of Patmos off the coast of Turkey. Crazy old age, like he's somewhere between 85 and 105.
Wait, why is he exiled?
We don't know why. Probably has to do with him being a believer in the Roman Empire. But he is in exile on the island of Patmos.
He was very outspoken against the worship of the emperors, and Domitian was very much big on being worshipped as an emperor, so that
Yep.
could have played a role. We don't know for sure though.
Yeah, that could be something there. So last week we started the book of Revelation and we got through the first half of it, chapters 1 through 11, and we're going to cover the second half of it tonight. Then we have 3 weeks of break, and on March 29th I will just be back from a cruise, and we will have a class that night, and that will be the beginning of our church history. And then we have Easter, so we only have one more class in the next 4 weeks. But then on the 12th of April we will start 4 weeks straight through all the rest of our church history. So that'll be church history of 2,000 years summarized in 5 weeks, conflicting with APUSH reviews I hear. And so APUSH students, if you have any creative solutions for what we can do to overcome that conflict, I'm all ears. We have like a month and a half to solve it. So you can talk and commiserate amongst yourselves if you got any ideas. Alright, one book left, just the Revelation. So, we'll just recap the outline of the book here a little bit. The first chapter is a prologue to the story. It sets up where John is, what he's starting to see. And then he actually spends the next 2 chapters writing introductory letters to 7 churches in Asia. And those are 7 churches that he had an apostolic relationship with. They're not scattered all over modern Asia, which of course is huge. Old ancient world Asia was just part of modern day Turkey, near Greece. And once he finishes the 7 letters, he jumps into the vision of the end of the age, chapters 4 through 19. I like to think of chapters 20 through 22 as a little different because they have a different feel to them. Once we get to there tonight, you'll understand. And that's looking beyond the end of this age at the ages that are yet to come. There's an interesting distinction to make about the end of the world, though, because everything that happens that we know of and think of as the end of the world is actually just the end of this age. And the world continues, and people continue, and it's just another age that the world will endure through. So, jumping into the middle of the book of Revelation, we have gone through the 7 seals, we have introduced the 7 trumpets, and John digresses from the main track of the book of Revelation and the Revelation and talks about something else that he saw. Revelation chapter 12 is enigmatic because if you read it and interpret it one way, it looks like it's already been fulfilled. If you look at it and read it another way, it looks like it all has yet to be fulfilled. So that is one of the mysteries of it. So in his vision, he sees a pregnant woman. She's clothed with the sun, and she has a crown of 12 stars, and she gives birth to a son. And then a red dragon, who's identified as the devil or Satan, which means in Hebrew the accuser, tries to devour this child. The woman is taken off into the desert for 1,260 days after she gives birth. The tail of the red dragon sweeps a third of the stars out of the sky. So, let's reflect on this vision just a little bit. Pregnant woman giving birth to a son who's going to rule the earth with an iron scepter, if I remember right. What does that sound like?
A king?
A king. Are we expecting a king to be born? Or we were expecting a king to be born? Right. So it sounds like Mary giving birth to Jesus. However, assuming it wasn't looking at Mary specifically, who would the woman represent? Because she's got a crown of 12 stars.
Who?
Israel,
Oh.
like the nation of Israel. 12 stars would be like the 12 tribes. So Israel gives birth to Jesus, and Satan tries to devour the child but doesn't get to, and then the woman is taken care of in the desert for 3.5 years or
Is
one.
that like Egypt?
Potentially, but the timeline of that around that doesn't look quite right. So this is where it's a little bit mysterious. And it says the tail sweeps 1/3 of the stars out of the sky. So what would be that would be representing if Satan's tail sweeps 1/3 of the stars out of the sky?
The angel.
Probably the angels. Because stars in the book of Revelation oftentimes are referring to angels. Not necessarily all the time, but this is one of those times where it's thought that he did. And they were cast down to earth, and so was the dragon. That actually happens next. So it says, there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fight against the dragon and his angels, which is where we start making, it actually connects the stars to angels in this passage, which is why we make that prophetic interpretation regularly. And it says the dragon's hurled to earth with his angels. The dragon pursues the woman, fails to get her, and so then he makes war against the saints. Who would the saints be?
The church?
Yeah, the church. All the people in the church. The Catholic idea of a saint is not necessarily the same as the biblical concept of a saint. That the saints are just those who are being sanctified, which is everybody who's a believer in Jesus. So, I'm not exactly sure how the Catholic Church cooked up their concept of a saint, honestly.
Doesn't it mean like someone who's really, really good?
Usually that's the pop culture understanding of it. The church has a different the Catholic Church has a slightly different.
They need to have done several things and it
Yep.
needs to be verified, and then you can achieve sainthood. Sometimes it's done posthumously as well.
Usually it is. It's not usually done while they're alive.
So if you want to be a saint, you have to die.
Great.
Now, does anybody remember who Michael is?
The archangel.
Archangel, Prince of the people of Israel, as introduced in the book of Daniel. So this is another one of those connections between the apocalyptic passages of Revelation and the Old Testament. Daniel introduces the Archangel Michael, and here we see him again leading the army of angels in a fight in the heavens against the dragon and his angels. And this is where it becomes really dicey, because a lot of people assume that Satan is down in hell, right?
Isn't he on Earth?
He's actually on the earth, yep. Roaming to and fro. But this implies that he either is in heaven still, or he was in heaven, had access to heaven. Anybody remember any Old Testament passages that shows Satan interacting with God in heaven?
What about Job?
Job, yep. Satan comes with all the other sons of God or the other angels and parades in heaven and has a conversation with God in the throne room of all places, which is one of those things where you think like he shouldn't be there, but he is. And so some people think that this has already happened and that when Satan rebelled, he fell and he was cast out of heaven. Other people think that this is something that is yet to take place and has yet to be fulfilled.
So when they say that Satan is a fallen angel,
Mm-hmm.
that means he was like he passed the judgment.
It means that he rebelled against God and lost some sort of position of authority and influence in the heavens.
But he passed the judgment.
What do you mean he passed the judgment?
Like they say that you're gonna get judged after you die.
Yep, he
and
has
you're
not been
determined
judged yet.
He hasn't.
Nope,
But how's he named?
he's no longer an angel.
Angels are, and well, not demons too, are created beings.
Yeah,
They're not people who do good deeds and go to heaven.
yep,
Never mind then.
okay.
That's a misconception.
Good job, Jeremy, you're tracking with it. Angels were created separately from people, and people go to heaven as a disembodied spirit. Angels exist in heaven and on earth as a spiritual being that God created when he created everything else.
Okay.
So, Satan was one of the original created angels, and he fell and rebelled really, really quickly, so that on the 10th day of after the world was created or so, he was able to lead Adam astray. And there weren't any dead people at that time, because no one had died. There was no death.
Were angels created before the creation?
Presumably in Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, angelic creatures are included in the heavens, because that's all inclusive of the heavenly spaces that we see when we look up in the sky, but also other realms of the creation, one thing we call the heavenly realms. So
Like the heavenlies that Franco's?
yes, yep, there's first heaven, second heaven, and third heaven. Has anybody heard this concept before?
Yes.
You have? Alright, so what's first heaven?
A long time.
Okay, so, yeah, this is only, Paul talks about how he was taken up in a vision to third heaven. So it implies that there must be a first heaven and a second heaven. The Bible does not actually describe first heaven or second heaven. Paul describes third heaven as being in the presence of God in the throne room with Jesus and such. So that leaves us wondering and struggling to define what first heaven and second heaven would be. Usually first heaven is understood as the sky that we look up into, and the heavens, if you look up in the night sky, you can see stars. So that is one of the heavens, probably first heaven. Because in Hebrew and Greek, when they talk about the heavens, it's inclusive of the sky and all the stars that are up there, and also angelic realms. So second heaven is assumed to be the part of earth that angels and demons interact with humans on, but we can't see. So Jesus is casting evil spirits out of people, so they're very physically present in his midst, but you can't see them. They're inside of a person, and so there's clearly something going on around us that we can't actually see. And angels came to Jesus, but people didn't see them. And there's a time in the Old Testament where Elijah prays and asks God, will you open the eyes of my servant? And the Aramean army was outside the city gates trying to arrest Elisha, and it wasn't Elijah, it was Elisha. So when Elisha's servant looks out, he sees the Aramean army. He's all terrified, but then his eyes are opened and he sees an army of flaming chariots surrounding the human army. And so it's like his eyes were opened and able to see into the angelic realm, which is oftentimes known as second heaven. Anyway, so going back into Revelation 12, the dragon, or Satan, is hurled to earth. He loses his place in the heaven, or lost his place in the heaven. And he takes a third of the stars with him, which implies what?
The angels.
Third of the angels. So the rebellion took out a third of the angelic beings that were created.
Like they followed him, or like they're like goners, like that?
Probably they followed him, like they rebelled with him, because they were the angels that fought against Michael and his angels. So you have two angelic armies. Satan's angelic army is outnumbered 2 to 1. So, yep. So we don't know how many of them there are, but there are twice as many angels as there are fallen angels or
Can
demons.
angels reproduce?
Jesus would imply that they don't when he said that in the resurrection, mankind will be like the angels, neither being married or given in marriage. So it's assumed that they don't
That and they never
reproduce.
die, so it's not like they really need to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
Well, but that means that they're a fixed number.
Yep, that would mean that there's a fixed number and that God created all of them at the get-go. So, he didn't do that with everything else. I guess you could say he did with stars and planets. But, in any case, moving along here. Revelation chapter 13 is a famous passage because it describes the beast. Have we heard of the beast before?
Yes.
You've heard of the beast, Micaiah, yes. Oftentimes it is equated with the Antichrist, which is what the Apostle John talks about in his letter, the 1 John, which was actually the second book that John wrote, but we call it 1 John, not 2 John.
I'm never gonna let that go.
I know. And is often compared to the man of lawlessness that Paul talks about. But I want you to think back into the Old Testament prophetic passages that we opened up the year with. Daniel was having visions, and what did he see when he saw his visions of various different creatures? The tree?
Yeah.
No, that was Nebuchadnezzar. That wasn't Daniel.
You're right. He saw an ox.
He saw... I don't think he saw an ox.
No.
No.
What about like an eagle?
Oh yeah, the four, like, what were those called?
It was a leopard with 4 heads. Or 4 horns.
Like the eagle, the ox,
That's Ezekiel. He was looking at a cherubim. Yep. You have...
So many,
there's too many, there is.
is it the one where it was like the
The four gospels.
goat was charging about and then like a ram arose and struck it down?
That's one of the visions, but it's not the one I'm talking about.
How about beast? Was there a beast in his vision?
There was a beast in his vision, yes. So Daniel has prophetic vision. He sees 4 creatures, and they all seem to represent empires. And so if you interpret the book of Revelation through the lens of Daniel's prophecies, quite a few of which have been fulfilled, the beast is not going to be an individual or a single person. It's actually going to be an empire that rules over at least a chunk of the earth, if not the entirety of the earth. So it has 10 horns, it has 7 heads. You remember when the Greeks invaded the Persian Empire, it says that there was a 4-headed creature that was ruling over the earth. And why would it have had 4 heads?
Were there 4 main Greek citizens?
There were 4 main Macedonian kingdoms.
Oh.
The king of the north, the king of the south were the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and then Thrace and Macedonia itself. Those were the 4 heads. So this 7-headed beast would imply that it's actually would be recognized on earth as more than one kingdom, but it actually is an aligned empire of sorts. Maybe culturally similar, like the Macedonian kingdoms were. Let's see, it says one head had a fatal wound on it which had been healed, and the beast was given power by the dragon. He makes war against the saints, and he is given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. He's worshipped by the inhabitants of the earth. This is one of those connections back to Domitian, who Jeremy referenced earlier. He was the Roman emperor of the day when John wrote this, who was requiring people to worship him. And Christians in particular were not really in favor of worshiping the emperor. Plenty of Romans would be like, I'll worship you as long as I can worship Jupiter and Mars and all the other Roman gods too. And they do. But Christians did not. So this is one of those connection points there. But that was a beast that came out of the sea, and now there's a second beast that is described in Revelation 13, is the beast that comes out of the earth. So this would sound like another empire, and this is interesting because it says it has 2 horns like a lamb, it exercises authority on behalf of the first beast, performs miraculous signs and wonders, and calls down fire from heaven. It sets up an image of the first beast and breathes life into the image, and it forces everyone to get the mark of the beast in order for them to be able to buy or sell. And the mark of the beast is the number 666, which is man's number. Ariana, did you just make a connection?
No, I just remembered that I did read this chapter.
Ah, you did read this one, okay.
I think we could do some of that stuff without it being supernatural.
Yeah, it's interesting how things are getting animated now. So, this one is a little bit more mysterious. I've heard a lot more interpretations as to what this beast could or could not be.
So what are people buying and selling?
Yeah, we buy and sell all kinds of things. Food,
Oh,
clothing, just buying, selling anything.
Is this mark like a tattoo?
It has been understood and interpreted lots of different ways. The most recent in vogue interpretation of the mark of the beast is that it's a chip. Kind of like you have on your debit card or credit card, except it'd be implanted into your hand or on your forehead. That's just speculative idea. I'm just relaying pop culture interpretation. One of the things we talked about last week, Maddie, is how people oftentimes will interpret the book of Revelation through the lens of the present, and that's not usually a good idea because that is not always a very accurate way of looking at the book of Revelation. It's better and safer to interpret Revelation through the lens of what Daniel wrote in the Old Testament. But anyway, people have wondered what the mark of the beast is for a really long time, and
Maybe it's like a branding, like they do
Yep.
cows.
yeah, that's what a lot of people thought for a really long time, is that it was a brand essentially. But it says that if a person doesn't have the mark on either their right hand or their forehead, they're not able to buy and sell. Now, one thing I'll point out is that that is an amount of power that no government has ever held on the face of the earth. So we are beyond that, or not there yet.
And why is man's number 666?
That is a mystery, and John specifically says this calls for wisdom if anyone can figure it out.
Is anyone
666.
even able to figure it out?
It's a mystery. Nobody knows what that really refers to.
How long the empire can have it? Easily just be nuclear capabilities.
Yep. Or rods from the gods. Yep. So yeah, the number 666 is another enigma. It says it's man's number. Why would 666 be the number of man?
It's pretty close to Annabelle's number.
Yep, she was born on 06/06/2006.
It's the day we were made.
Mankind was made on the 6th day. Very good, Makai.
What, were you looking for that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
What was significant about the number 6? Yep. It's man's number. We were made on the 6th day. And why do you think there's 3 6s?
The sixth
It's
month,
number 3.
Because what?
the 6th month and the 6th year? I don't know.
Nope, that's Annabelle's birthday. 6th day of the 6th month in the 6th year of the millennium. Oftentimes it is connected to the idea of the Trinity. 3 gods. And so this is the idea that man is God. Potentially. That is only a single interpretation. Like I said, it's an outstanding mystery, the fulfillment of which has not yet been revealed. But I trust in the day it will be revealed, and we'll all know that we should not take this mark. Calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints. Alright, moving on. We're gonna speed up here a little bit. Revelation 14, there are 3 angels, and they all speak a woe of sorts over the earth. It says, "Fear God, the hour of judgment has come." The second angel says, or declares, "Fallen is Babylon the Great." And the third angel says, "If anyone worships the beast, receives his mark, they too will drink of God's fury." And this is where the book of Revelation pivots very clearly into the judgments and the wrath of God being poured out. So there are 7 bowls. This connects back to the 7th trumpet. So you have 7 seals. The 7th seal leads to the 7 trumpets. The 7th trumpet leads to the 7 bowls of God's wrath. It's like Russian nesting dolls, one right after the other. One thing I will point out is that God does not judge the righteous with the wicked. And this is a clear pattern throughout the entirety of the scriptures. So during the flood, Noah and his family were deemed righteous. Were they judged?
No.
No.
They were spared in the ark. What about Lot and his family in Sodom and Gomorrah?
No.
No, they were saved. Yes, so there's all kinds of people that were spared out of judgment. There's another person in Jerusalem who helped Jeremiah out of a well when he was thrown down the well, and God spared that man's life when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. Rahab in Jericho, very good. She had faith. She was a prostitute, but she had faith and believed that God was going to destroy the city of Jericho as he said, and she acted in faith, spared the lives of the spies, and God spared her. She did not succumb, was not receiving of wrath in that day. So as the judgments come in the bowls, the first bowl it pours out on earth causes people to get ugly and painful sores. The second bowl turns the sea to blood, reminiscent of Egypt. Painful and ugly sores is also reminiscent of Egypt. In the third bowl, the rivers and the springs turn to blood, which is also reminiscent of the plagues of Egypt. In the fourth bowl, the sun scorches people with fire. There's global warming to a whole new level. And the fifth bowl is darkness coming on the kingdom of the beast, which is also like one of the plagues of Egypt. Yep. So the sixth bowl dries up the river Euphrates. This one is different from those plagues. It says that 3 spirits go forth from the mouth of the beast to gather the kings of the earth to Armageddon. Now, I want to point something out here that eludes most believers. If the spirits go out to gather the kings of the earth to Armageddon, is there a one world government? No. Most people interpret the beast to be a one world government. And when I was a kid, everybody was afraid the United Nations was going to turn into that one world government. Was the beast, terrified, mortified that the United Nations was going to, bring everything that we thought was terrible. And people had dreams about it, and they had fears about it, and it was crazy. If kings are being gathered from across the earth, there's multiple nations, multiple governments, and that would actually end up making sense then as to why there are 200,000 armed mounted troops, because you have nations still potentially at war with one another. It's 200 million, not 200,000. A lot of troops. All right, moving on to the 7th bowl. It says there's a great earthquake that splits the great city into 3 parts. I don't remember if the great city is implying Jerusalem or Rome or Babylon, honestly. It says that all of the cities of the nations collapse, the islands flee, and they can't find the mountains anymore. This is a serious earthquake. And then to top it off, there's a plague of hail that happens too.
The
That's
islands flee, is that sea level significantly rising?
could be, yes. If the sea level rose even just 20 feet, a lot of islands would disappear. So
So especially if the earth got scorched by the sun.
Yeah, if the sun scorches the earth in the fourth bowl, you're right, that could melt a lot of ice, and then that could raise the sea levels. I'm curious to know how the mountains can't be found. It seems like it'd be really hard to lose Mount Everest or something like. So there's one of those things where it's like maybe there's some figurative license being used in this prophetic vision. It's important to remember that some of it Revelation seems to be literal and some of it very much seems to be figurative, and sometimes it's all interwoven together. So that is the seventh bowl of God's wrath poured out. And then we have another digression, and we shift our viewpoint here to the woman on the beast. It says there's a woman dressed in purple and scarlet. She's called the great prostitute. Kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and she's sitting on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, which sounds like the beast we were learning about just 4 chapters earlier. It says, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. So what might Babylon the Great, this woman, be representing? Think back to Old Testament references to prostitution. Search.
No, I'm looking at my dictionary actually.
Okay.
Oh, it's not that
Well,
one.
didn't
Okay,
they-
we're going to my Bible.
Like idols?
Idolatry. Very good, Ariana. Yes. Using the prophetic or in the prophets, God often accused Israel of committing adultery, prostituting herself with all the other idols.
That's
And we're
why
just
we read the
reading that in
prophecies.
Ezekiel.
Yes.
Yes, that's why we read. Yes, there was an utterly graphic passage in Ezekiel that we recently read together.
Really?
And yeah. Maybe you didn't.
Maybe it was like a couple weeks ago.
It was a few weeks ago, yeah. This year, since Christmas.
I've been reading Revelation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that compares Israel and Judah to 2 prostitutes, unfaithful daughters that,
Okay.
yep. And it was referring to idolatry. And so that is likely what this is referencing to. Babylon the Great, something to do with world religions and the abominations of the earth. Continues talking about the beast, and this is another one of those mysteries that gets everybody scratching their heads. Describes the beast as once was, now is not, and yet will come. So it's got 7 heads, which are 7 hills and 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and 1 is yet to come. Beast itself is an 8th king that belongs to the 7. The 10 horns are 10 kings. They give their power to the beast.
It was like a row.
Yes, this is very much a riddle. It comes across as a riddle, it is a riddle, and this has confounded great minds for almost 1,900 years. So, probably one of those riddles that will be clear and make sense when we see the fulfillment of it, and will probably remain mysterious until then.
So did John choose to phrase it like that, or is that what he was told to write?
Pretty sure he was told that by an angel. So, once was, now is not, and yet will come is the part that is the most challenging for everybody's interpretation of the beast to fulfill. Something that was, now currently isn't, but that now is in John's time, which means it's not the Roman Empire. An often strong connection to the beast. Moving on to the 18th chapter. It says that shows the fall of Babylon. It says it's overtaken by plagues in one day. There's death and mourning and famine. Had been a very prosperous trading center, and it says that all of the mariners and the traders and the sea captains were mourning when they saw this fire that destroyed it in an hour and all the smoke that came up from it. And so it's interesting because this destruction that is described here parallels the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which got smoked in a single day in Genesis chapter 19. And that seems to have, well, it was described as fire falling from heaven. It seems like it was probably an airburst of a comet or an asteroid in the atmosphere that essentially detonated a nuclear warhead right over the top of the two cities. And there's archaeological evidence to support that at the present. We'll describe that in youth group in a few weeks, but not yet. But anyway, so Babylon falls in a single hour, destroyed by fire, which was always one of those things that was a mystery until recently. Now if we thought of a nation destroyed by fire in a single hour, what would we think? Nuclear war, right. Now it's like, oh yeah, nation totally could be destroyed by fire. Single hour, piece of cake. Totally could happen. Revelation 19, we have something that looks like the Battle of Armageddon taking place here. There's a rider on a white horse, and
Like
his...
another one?
There's another rider, yep. And rider on the white horse is actually imagery that goes back to Zechariah, the prophet in the Old Testament. And so he has a reference to the rider on a white horse, which is why they're expecting the Messiah, when Jesus first came, to be entering Jerusalem as a conquering king riding on a white horse. And there was once a British general who was very aware of this passage in the New Testament and knew aware of the passage in the Old Testament. And in 1918, when his army was invading Jerusalem, he was riding a white horse. So he dismounted his horse and walked into Jerusalem so that nobody would mistake him for being this rider on a white horse. And his aides took note of that. His name was General Allenby. He had a really funny strategy for taking over Jerusalem. It was controlled by the Ottoman Turks at the time. So he sent a British biplane over the city, which the Ottomans had not seen many airplanes at that point in time. And it dropped all of these leaflets: "Flee the city, we're about to invade," signed Allenby. And they didn't translate Allenby correctly. It looked to the Muslims as if it was signed by Allah himself. And yeah, leaflets raining down from the sky, signed by Allah. They're like, we're gonna get out of Jerusalem. So they did.
That's funny.
Yep.
That's actually smart. If you really want somebody to leave, you could just do that.
Yep. It was not intentional on his part. He didn't sign it Allah, he just signed it Allenby, but they mistook it. It was an interesting piece of psychological warfare. The United States does things like that from time to time
But
still.
it works.
It worked, yes. Anyway, so this rider on the white horse is named the Word of God, and he's leading the armies of heaven. King of Kings and Lord of Lords is written on his thigh. It's important to remember, Jesus seems to have a tattoo. King of Kings and Lord of Lords.
Oh, this is Jesus.
Yes, this is Jesus. I jumped to the chase. But yes, who would be the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords? Who would be leading the armies of heaven? Whose name is the Word of God? It would be Jesus. So it says, the beast and the kings of the earth gather to make war against him. The beast gets captured along with the false prophet, and they're thrown into the lake of fire ahead of everybody else. And the armies are killed by the sword. And this is where it says the blood flows as high as the horse's bridle for miles and miles, which is an awful lot of carnage.
That is not a white horse anymore.
No longer a white horse. So then we shift into Revelation 20, and that Battle of Armageddon that we just went through and described seems to be the end of the age, and Revelation 20 starts talking about another age. So as much as we usually think of Armageddon as being the end of the world, it actually doesn't seem to be as described in the book of Revelation. So the dragon, which remember is Satan, says is bound and locked in the abyss for 1,000 years, and Christ reigns on earth for 1,000 years. alongside anybody who was beheaded for not receiving the mark of the beast while the beast was here on earth. So, earth is not done, people are not done, people survive all that outpouring of the wrath of God. That judgment does not exterminate the human population, it is just simply a transition point. Similar in scope to like the flood that flooded the earth in Noah's day. There is a judgment coming. But there's going to be a massive change in government. Somehow Jesus is going to rule the earth, and people will be working with him on that. But that's only for 1,000 years. And then something happens. Because Satan is released from the abyss, he goes out on the earth and deceives the nations again. And it says he gathers Gog and Magog from the four corners of the earth. And this is something that is referencing back to Ezekiel. And one of the apocalyptic passages of Ezekiel references Gog and Magog. That's the only connection point between that chapter of Ezekiel and any other apocalyptic passage, as far as I can tell. So all the nations of the earth get gathered for battle again, and they are devoured by fire from heaven, and then we see Satan is thrown into the lake of fire. So what we usually think of as the end is just the end of the age, and it's not actually the end. And one of the fascinating things about Revelation chapter 20 is that you have 1,000 years, and then Satan is released from the abyss. How much time goes on between Satan's release and he's able to deceive all the nations and gather their armies to Jerusalem again? Doesn't say. That could be another 1,000 years, it could be 4,000 years, it could be a month and a half. So this is an example of mountaintop prophecy here potentially, because we are only seeing the peaks and the highlights of things that are going on in distant ages that are yet to come in the earth. Which means that very large periods of time go by without us knowing what's actually happening. We don't know much of what happens in the 1,000 years. There's only a few Old Testament passages that seem to align with that. And after the 1,000 years, we don't have any idea of how much time actually elapses. Revelation 20 then ends with a vision of the great white throne judgment. And this is where all the dead are raised back to life. This is the resurrection that Jesus referred to, the Old Testament prophets referred to. It says the sea gives up its dead, Hades gives up its dead, and all the dead are judged for their deeds. Those whose names are not found in the book of life then are thrown into the lake of fire.
So what do you think John saw mean?
Yeah, in theory, John saw all of us in that multitude, and every other person who ever was born and lived on the earth, and ever will be born and will live on the earth, all in that vast multitude. I guess we make an appearance in the Bible right there.
Okay, I don't really understand the Hades thing. Like, is Hades a place or is it a person?
Hades is a place in the New Testament understanding of it. I was really confused by Hades Town because Hades was a character. Apparently in Greek mythology, it's a little ambiguous as to whether Hades is a place or a person.
Well, it said Hades Town is a place and Hades is a person. In the
Right.
thing.
But Hades Town is just like the town that Hades has.
Yeah. So that's what doesn't make sense.
Right. In the New Testament, Hades is almost always referenced, I think it's always referenced as a place. It's the place of the dead, which is why Hades gives up its dead. And the lake of fire is usually what we think of when we think of Hades, but it's not actually Hades. It's a different place because Hades gets thrown into the lake of fire. Which has got to have a little bit of figurative license to it, because when you've got all the dead judged and are thrown into the lake of fire, like what does that actually look like, feel like, experience? Clearly it's not pleasant, but the actual demonstration of how that plays out could have a little bit of prophetic license there. But then we go into the hopeful thing, which we'll get through here quick. In Revelation 21 and 22, we have a new heaven and a new earth. And this is where the Bible completes its complete story arc And so Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 relate very, very closely to Revelation 21 and 22. So you have the first two chapters and the last two chapters of the Bible in the order that it currently exists in, and they have all kinds of connections. And so you could read those two chapters in Genesis and these two chapters in Revelation and start making connection points. But one of them, it says Jerusalem descends from heaven, and it is figurative because it is the bride of Christ, which is the church, the believers in Jesus. And on the new earth, we have the river of life with the tree of life, and the river of life is flowing from the throne of God. And it says the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. So it's referring to the tree of life that was created in the Garden of Eden and was destroyed. Then John closes the book. He identifies himself as the author once again and the one who received the visions. He gives a warning against anybody adding to that vision or taking away from the revelation. A lot of people apply that to the entirety of the scriptures, but John's warning really only applies to his book, just the revelation, not the entirety of the scriptures. So that was a lot, and it's a little late. Does anybody have any questions?